If you're watching this video, you've definitely seen the Vision Pro announcement. It's an incredible looking headset, but the main cool parts about it are actually the software. So as far as hardware goes, all the functionality and stuff is basically what we already have in the Quest Pro. The really cool and really exciting bits are the software behind the actual headset. And the cool part is, you don't have to wait until the Vision Pro comes out to try it. Well, one, if you go to the link down in the description, you could download it right now for free. But in the next several minutes, we are going to build it together. I'm going to show you how to build the eye gaze interactions. This is going to work with the Quest Pro eye tracking, as well as the Quest 2 and Quest 3 that don't have eye tracking. It's just going to point to wherever the headset's looking. So we're going to build that into our app that we're about to go through, and also build in the pinch to select. So it's really going to be three kind of separate parts. One of them is going to be just your straight up pass through that you can see the world with. The second part is going to be your eye gazing, or how do we track the eyes, or where your headset's looking at least. And then the third is going to be selection. So when you actually pinch, we want to select what you're looking at. So we're going to go through in this tutorial and build all of that. And then this is actually going to be the first of a series of tutorials that I am super excited about, where we're just going to go through and build Vision OS pretty much. So we're going to go through and build the home screen effectively today. We're going to talk about the resizing, how to move apps around, how to have multiple apps up at the same time, even kind of talk about the actual style, the kind of glass morphism style that is being used. We're going to walk through all of that over the next few videos, so definitely subscribe if you're interested and excited about that kind of stuff, and you'll get to try it all out before the Quest Pro comes out, so that's kind of fun. I do want to give one shout out to Thrill, who really gave me some motivation to go ahead and make this tutorial. I had already been kind of thinking about doing it, but his video that he posted going through the UI and actually trying it out for himself really gave me a kick in the pants and got me to come through and make this tutorial. And I gotta say, it's well worth it. Like, trying out the UI, I definitely, if you don't watch the rest of this tutorial, if you just go down to the description and download the APK and try it out for yourself, it's amazing. This is definitely going to be the future of UI. It's so nice. But yeah, without further ado, let's jump into the computer and I'll walk you through step by step, all the way from the beginning, how to set up a project and create the Vision Pro UI. So inside Unity Hub, I'm going to assume that you already have or have knowledge of a few things. So one of them is going to be how to actually use the basics of Unity and use the basics of C#, the basic understanding of those. And also I am going to assume that your headset is already in developer mode and you know how to move APK files onto your headset, sideload them on there. So that's kind of a basic understanding. I'm not going to actually go through how to do any of that, but we are going to start from scratch and build this project up. So first thing is what version we're using. So I'm using 2022 3.2 F1, and I've also tried this in the 2021 version. So as long as you're using an LTS version and have all of your software updated, including the packages and your Oculus software and all of that kind of stuff, you should be good to go. One important note is to make sure you have this Android module installed. So you just go to this cogwheel, add modules, and then check the boxes next to Android build support, OpenJDK, and Android SDK and NDK tools. So check all of those boxes and hit install, and you should be good to go. So we're going to go to projects, create a new project in 2022 LTS, and this is going to be a 3D project. Reason being, we're using Oculus integration, and that is based off of the built-in render pipeline. So just for kind of ease of use, we're going to start in 3D. So let's name this Vision Pro tutorial and create this project. And as this is coming up, just feel free to skip around in this video if I am covering things that you already know how to do, like how to set up for Oculus. Go ahead and skip ahead in the video to the actual parts that you want to watch specifically or want to learn about. With our new project up, first thing we want to do is go to File, Build Settings, and we're going to swap this over to Android. I'm going to do this now because it's a lot faster than doing it later. So just using all the default settings, we'll come back in and customize this a little bit later when we actually do a build for our headset. But for now, the basic settings are fine. Now let's get this set up for VR. So let's go to Edit, Project Settings, and then XR Plugin Management down at the bottom, and just hit Install XR Plugin Management. And then we're using Oculus this time around, so I'm going to check the Oculus checkbox there. And same thing on the PC side, we're going to use Oculus. And then let's jump into the Oculus tab here. All the PC default settings are fine. Over the Android side, we want to make sure to check Quest Pro because we're going to need that eye tracking there. And then the rest of the default settings should be fine. And we can exit out of our project settings. And then next we need to bring in the Oculus integration package. And you can find that on the Unity Asset Store. Just search for Oculus integration and it'll be the first one that comes up. It's free and you just have to click this box that says add to my assets. Once you do that, we can go to Window, Package Manager, and then go to My Assets. And then just search for Oculus. And then we're going to click on Oculus integration. Make sure you import or update or download first, and then we're going to import. And it's going to give you a big list of things it's going to bring in. We're just going to import everything. If you know exactly what you want, you can go through and check that off. But for this particular video, everything's fine. We're going to get a few pop-ups. So this one in particular is saying that some of the API files have changed and do we want to upgrade them? So I'm just going to hit yes and also do that for future packages. And yes, this has a lot of setup and install and whatnot. So like I said earlier in the video, if you want to just skip ahead and download the completed project, that is going to be down in the description as well as the APK file if you want to just install that and play it for yourself right now. Once that finishes installing or updating, we can get another pop-up that says if we want to send usage statistics. Wow, that's difficult to say. Do with that what you will. And then also Spatializer plugin needs an update, so we'll upgrade that as well. And then Spatializer wants to restart Unity, so we'll let it restart. All right, now we have Oculus integration installed, but we're not quite done yet. We should go to Oculus tab, or up here on the toolbar, and then go to Tools, and then OVR Utilities plugin, and we want to do a manual update to OVR plugin. Reason being is because we are getting some errors down here at the bottom, and if we go into Oculus VR, and then prefabs, and then the OVR camera rig that we're going to end up using in our scene. If we look over in the settings, which we'll go through with this in a little more detail later, but face tracking, eye tracking, all the different kind of trackings we want are going to be locked, as well as pass-through. So what we need to do is go to Oculus, Tools, OVR Utilities plugin, and then do a manual update. That's going to restart the Unity editor as well, and then we don't have to save. I'll come back through and set everything up correctly. So now we should be able to go to console, clear everything out, shouldn't be seeing any errors. You'll also notice if we go to Oculus, Tools, and then OVR Utilities plugin again, you'll see that we've swapped over from whatever the package manager provided plugin was to the OpenXR, which is what we want. And then one more little bit of setup, you'll see there's actually an Oculus button down here at the bottom now, or you can just go to Edit, Project Settings, and then Oculus here, and then we get a whole list of things that need to be changed in our settings in order to comply with Oculus's standards. And this is going to be for PC and Android. So we're just going to hit Fix All and then Apply All. And it's going to go through and compress everything correctly and change the color space and fix a lot of other settings that we would otherwise have to go through and do one by one. It's actually a very nice tool. There we go. Once that's finally done with Android, we can jump over into the PC and fix that one as well. So now it's all green checkboxes. One more thing to do while we're in here is inside of the player tab, go ahead and swap the default company over to whatever your name is or whatever your studio name is. And then make sure your product name is going to be whatever you want to eventually name this app. That's just going to make it a whole lot easier to figure out which file is yours when you are trying to start it in your headset. Because this is where the name comes from. And after all that, we can finally start building our project. So let's jump back all the way into assets. I'm going to right click and create a new folder called _projects, or just project. That way it stays at the top of the list here. And then this is where all of my files are going to go into. This is how I usually set up my projects. And then we're going to have a scripts folder, because I know we're going to have some scripts in there. We're going to have a scenes folder, and we're going to have a prefabs folder. We'll start with that for now. I'm sure we'll come back and add some more later. First things first, let's create a new scene. So I'm going to right click, create a scene, and we'll just call this Vision Pro UI test. And then open that scene up. And then we want to delete the main camera because we're in VR after all. And then let's go back to the Oculus VR prefabs folder and drag and drop the OVR camera rig in. And then like I mentioned before, if you scroll all the way down, you'll see that now everything is enabled since we did that force update. So let's kind of go through this from top to bottom and set up all the settings in our OVR camera rig, which I'm just going to rename to player, because that's ultimately what it is. So transform, we can start at the center. The OVR camera rig is going to be set. All the default is fine. The OVR manager, this is where you can open settings and actually set the target devices with Quest Pro. So make sure that is checked. Most of these other settings are fine. As far as tracking origin type, we can set that to stage because we're going to be in pass-through mode. And then down here in the Quest features, we're going to say hand tracking support needs to be controllers and hands or hands only. So I'm just going to allow both. And then I'm going to increase the hand tracking frequency up a little bit just to capture that pinch action a little bit better. And then now down here for the eye tracking support, we're going to say it is supported but not required because now you can also use the Quest 2 or the Quest 3. And then pass-through support is going to be supported as well. And we're just going to check enable pass-through down here at this checkbox. And then the permission request on startup, we're going to need to require eye tracking. That's just required by default. If you're using eye tracking, you have to ask permission to use it. And then we've got an OVR headset emulator down here. That should be fine. So down here at the bottom, let's add a OVR pass-through layer. And this is what's going to actually, basically as a 360 video around the entire world, have our pass-through displayed. And the way we want it to be displayed is with underlay, which means it's going to be underneath all of the applications and icons and everything we have inside of the world. That way we can see the icon and the pass-through behind it or under it. And that should be good for now. You'll also notice down here we have a Oculus issue again. So when using pass-through layer in your project, it's required to make a clear background. So we can hit fix for that, which is quite nice. And actually what all that did was in the center eye here, if we open up our player in the hierarchy and we go to background, it is now a solid color and it is black instead of using the skybox. So that's all that changed there, and now pass-through should be set up. So we can actually save this, put your Quest in link mode, and you should be able to load in and see your play space. Now this isn't going to be particularly exciting for you to watch, but I can see my pass-through now that I'm hitting play. Everything is running. In Unity, you will not actually be able to see anything. It's just going to be black for privacy and security reasons. They don't actually pass that data back through. But in my headset, I'm seeing my world in color pass through, just like the Quest Pro will allow for. So that's one box checked. We have pass through working. Next thing we need to do is set up our gaze interaction. So having the ability to look wherever we want in the world and it kind of get tracked with us. So we're going to right click on the tracking space and create an empty game object underneath the tracking space. And this is just going to be called Gaze Interactor. And then on the Gaze Interactor, make sure our transform is set to our default values. And then we want a OVR eye gaze. And you can set whatever eye you want it to be particularly favored on. We'll just leave it at default. And then this confidence threshold is going to be how confident you are in the eye looking versus the headset direction. And so we are going to drag it all the way down so it's going to be totally focused on wherever the eyes are looking. And then if the eye tracking is not actually enabled in your headset, then it'll just default to wherever the headset is pointed. And then this tracking mode down here, we're going to swap to tracking space, just so that you can actually move around in your space and it is going to follow you around. And then you also notice there's something called a reference frame here. And it's really just wherever the starting frame where you want the eyes to be looking whenever the game starts. So for that, we're just going to create a new reference frame game object underneath tracking space again. And then we're going to set the X direction. And then we're going to set the Z direction to just be 1 forward. And then inside of Gaze Interactor, we can drag and drop reference frame. And now technically eye tracking is set up. So we will actually follow. So this Gaze Interactor object is going to always be pointing wherever your eyes are looking. So this Z direction is going to be the forward direction, and that's going to be the ray in which your eyes are looking. But how do we actually capture that and use it to shoot a raycast out of in order to target different icons and whatnot? And for that, we're going to need some custom scripts. So realistically for this tutorial, you only need 2 scripts. One of them is going to be Gaze Interactor, which is going to go on this. And then we're going to have another Gaze Interactable, which is going to be for icons that you're able to select. First, let's just set up the Gaze Interactor script. So inside of our project scripts folder, I'm going to right click and create a new C# script called Gaze Interactor. And then double click to open that up in Visual Studio. And then just like I always like to start my scripts, I'm going to clean it up so it is empty. And then we are just going to draw a ray out from the eye to start out with, just to see where we're actually looking. So to do that, we just want to have the update method. And then inside of the update method, we're going to debug, draw ray. And then that ray is going to start wherever our object is, so transform.position. And then we are going to send it a transform.forward, so wherever the forward direction is. And then the length that we actually want to send the ray out is going to be, we'll say 10 for now. And then the color, we can do color.red is fine. And so now every frame we are going to be sending out a ray wherever we are looking. So if we save that, we jump back into Unity. So in our Gaze Interactor, we're going to drop our Gaze Interactor script. Sometimes I get this error that says can't add script component Gaze Interactor because the script class cannot be found. And there's no errors. I don't really see any issues. So whenever I get this, I'll just copy the particular script in question, exit out of that, and then we're just going to delete it. Now, for some reason, Oculus is saying there's a bunch of SDK files they want to clean up, so we're just going to say, okay, sure, you can clean up all the files you want to clean up. Kind of a random time to bring that up. And now for our scripts file, we're just going to right-click, create, C# script, call it Gaze Interactor. And then before we add any code to it, I'm going to drop it onto our gaze interactor object. And now we can open it up and paste the copied code. It's kind of a weird workaround if you ever get this issue. It's VR development. We're very cutting edge here, so it's just going to be fraught with these weird kind of workarounds. So then I'm going to press Control A to highlight everything and Control V to paste in the code we had copied earlier. Back into Unity, let everything reload. And now we can test it again, and we should see a ray shooting out 10 meters from wherever our gaze is. I'm going to swap back into scene view so that you can actually see me. And so I'm looking around and I'm holding my headset still right now. I'm facing directly at the computer. And then when I look to the left and when I look to the right, you'll see that the gaze actually moves around as I move my eyes around. And then if I move the headset, my eyes also naturally move, of course, with the headset. So that moves around as well too. So we have gaze interaction working. Let's actually set that up with some interactables. So below player, I'm going to right click and create a new 3D object. And this is just going to be an empty one. And we'll call it home menu. And then underneath here is where we're going to keep all of our icons. So I'm going to right click again, create an empty child, and this is going to be called app menu icon, something like that. And then also, just so like we can actually see what we're dealing with here, I'm going to create a capsule object, move it up 1, so the Y is up to 1, and that's going to be our frame of reference. So we have a scale frame of reference here. So this is a 2 meter high capsule, which is a little taller than the average human being. And then we want the home menu to be, let's say, something like 3.5 meters out from wherever we're standing. And then we want it to be, let's say, 1.25 meters up. And then we're going to flip it around so it's actually facing us. So that's where our kind of home menu is going to be in the world. And then we're going to have our first app be directly in the center. Now, the way I'm going to set this up is on the app menu icon is going to be where all of our primary scripts are. So we're going to have a rigid body on here. Let's set this up to not use gravity and be kinematic. And then we're going to swap collision detection to be continuous because we always want to be checking for collisions. And then we're going to add a sphere collider. And this is where you're going to have to look in order to actually highlight this icon. So when you look somewhere in the sphere, no matter what direction, you can always look at it. Sphere collider is a pretty good use case for this. We can always kind of adjust this later. I think a radius of like 5, maybe even 0.4, like a little smaller is pretty good. And then just imagine having a bunch of these kind of scattered about and you just glance at each individual one. And then underneath here, we're going to add a new C# script called gaze interactable. And we'll go ahead and drop the gaze interactable script on here. And this is what's going to handle the on hover enter, on hover exit, on select enter, on select exit, all of those events. So now the idea is we're going to have a raycast coming out from our eyes. And when the raycast intersects this sphere here, we want to cause something to happen. And that thing that is going to happen is going to be set up inside of this gaze interactable script. So let's open that up and set this up how we want it. So I'm going to clean it up. And then we really want 4 public events. So I'm going to have a public Unity event. That's going to bring in this using Unity engine.events. And then they're going to be called on hover enter. And then I'm going to just copy this line and then paste it 3 more times. And we're going to have an on hover exit. If I can spell exit. An on select enter. And an on select exit. So these are going to be the 4 different states or different actions that can happen at this particular point. Feel free to add more as you want. And then we're going to have 4 different methods that will handle each one of these events. So, and these can be private. So we're going to have a private void handle hover enter. And these don't need to accept any arguments or anything. I'm just going to copy that one and then paste it 3 more times. And again, change the names to coincide with whatever it is actually happening. So select enter and select exit. And then inside of these events, you can really write whatever you want. You can change a scene, you can have some UI element pop up, you can turn something on, turn something off. This is where all of that happens. And then the way we link this event to the particular method is going to be in the start method. So all right, start, hit tab to auto-populate it, and then we're going to set up on hover enter, add listener, and the listener is going to be handle hover enter. And of course, we're going to duplicate it. And make sure to change the method that it's actually calling out to as well. There we go. And best practice is to always unsubscribe from an event if you are subscribing from it. So we'll set up the on destroy method and then copy and paste this chunk of subscriptions and then change it to remove listener. And then I'm just going to copy remove and paste it in there. So we are having 4 public events. We are subscribing each one of those events to a particular method that we can then come back and add code to later if we would like. So this really just enhances the functionality of whatever object we want to be able to be looked at and gazed at, and some action or function happens. And then of course we can destroy the listeners for all these events as well. And this is really the entire Gaze interactable script. So this is open for you to do whatever you want with. And then also, if we jump back into Unity, once it reloads, you'll see that there is a whole list of Unity events that we can tie into from the inspector too. So if you're more of a designer or want to rapidly prototype something, you can just go through and add a bunch of functionality that happens whenever on hover enter happens. So this is a super nice way to set this up. But how do we actually know when we are being hovered or when we are being selected? So that's where the Gaze interactor scripts starts to get a little bit bigger. So there's going to be a few different categories in here. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a couple headers. So this first header is going to be for debugging. And this one we can start out with having a serialized private field for a bool that's going to say, are we actually showing the ray or not? And we'll set it to start out with true. And then inside of our update method, we only want to draw this ray if we are in the Unity editor. So if we run a build, we don't actually want to be doing a debug draw. So inside of here, we're just going to say if Unity editor, and then behind it, just end the if. There we go. And then we only want to draw the ray if this show ray is true. So we'll have a if statement. So if show ray, then we can actually do a debug draw. So I'll put that in parentheses as well. There we go. And then the other things we want to do inside of this update method are really going to be performing some kind of raycast. And that raycast is going to check whether we're hovering over an item. And then we're going to do a attempt to select. So this is really the 2 different functionalities that we're going to do inside of this Gaze interactor. So we're constantly looking around, checking if we're hovering over something, and then we're going to check and see if our hands are actually pinching down on something, and if they are, then we are going to select it. Let's create a method for this raycast. So it's just going to be a private void perform raycast. And then inside of here, and then we're going to call perform raycast in the update method. And then I'll delete the comment because perform raycast is pretty self-explanatory. And then inside of this perform raycast method, we're actually doing a few things. So first we're going to actually do the raycast, see if we hit anything. And then if true, we want to check and see if we're already hovering. And if that's true, then we'll do nothing. But if it's false, then we want to actually start hovering. And then we're also going to need to check and see if it's something we can actually hover over. So is gaze interactable? There we go. So if we got a raycast hit, then we're going to check and see if it's a gaze interactable. If it is a gaze interactable, we're going to check and see if we're already hovering on it. If we're not, or if we are already hovering, then we'll not do anything. If we're not already hovering, we'll actually call the onHoverInter method. Basically what we're going to do. And then if we are not actually hitting anything on the raycast, then we'll cancel hover. So let's go ahead and write that out in code. First thing we want to get is whatever direction we're actually going to shoot this raycast, which is really just going to be our transform position or transform forward. But we also want to set the distance for that as well. So we're going to have a ray direction, and that's going to be equal to the transform dot forward, and then we can actually multiply this by a max distance. And that's just going to be a float variable that we set. We can create a header here for settings. And then let's create a serialized field. That's going to be a private float and can just be our max distance. And we can initially set that to 10. And that max distance is going to be the same thing that's going to be inside of this show ray here. So we want to do transform forward dot times max distance, which is basically going to be the exact same thing we do here with ray direction. And then we're going to do this first raycast hit if statement. So we'll do if physics dot raycast. Then we're going to send it the transform dot position of wherever this object is, the ray direction. We're going to get out a raycast hit. So if we hit anything, then this is the value that we'll get out. We'll give it the max distance, and we'll also give it a layer mask. And this is going to be a value that we set up here as well. We'll do a private layer mask, and this is just going to be what particular layers are we allowed to interact with or not. And then that's just going to get set in the inspector. And then inside of this if statement, we can go ahead and set the gaze interactables to have a particular layer, and that way we won't have to do this check. So we can actually eliminate this one, which will be pretty nice. The way we can do that is back in Unity. On our app menu icon, in the layers, right now it's set to default. We're going to add a layer and call it gaze interactable. And then back onto the icon, set it to gaze interactable. And now we know everything with a layer of gaze interactable is going to have a gaze interactable script attached to it. And this is something we're going to set as a prefab a little bit later once we get most of it set up. And inside of here, we can say the variable interactable is going to be equal to the hit.collider.getComponent gaze interactable. So we're just taking whatever we hit, we're grabbing whatever collider is on it, and then getting a component attached adjacent to wherever that collider is called gaze interactable, which is if we jump back into Unity again. So we are hitting the sphere collider here, and then we are checking if anything else on this object is a gaze interactable, which it is, and so then we're grabbing this, and now we have access to all of the methods and everything. This is where we actually store if we're hovering over something or not. So back at up at the top, we'll create a serialized private field called gaze interactable, and this is going to be called hovered interactable. I can't spell and talk at the same time. So, and then here we're going to check and see if we are actually hovering over anything yet. So if hovered interactable is not equal to null. And then we're also going to check and make sure that we're not already hovering over this particular object. So like if we swapped from one hovered object to another hovered object, we're going to make sure that we didn't just transition. And to do that, we'll just make sure that the hovered interactable is not equal to the current interactable. So right now we're basically checking to see if the hovered interactable is different than what we are currently interacting with. Then we are going to set the hovered interactable on hover exit. We'll call that. If anything is subscribed to it, invoke. And then we're going to swap things around. We'll set the hovered interactable equal to the interactable. And then we'll call the hovered interactable on hover enter. So basically what we're doing is if we've already have a hovered interactable cached somewhere, if it's not null, and the current interactable we are hitting is different than the one we have cached, then we need to swap it basically. And so what we're doing is exiting the last one, the one that we have cached, uncaching it and caching the new one, and then calling on hover enter for the new one. So that's basically what this if statement does. So if it's not that particular instance, if it's not that particular case, and then hovered interactable is actually null, then we want to just go ahead and set. So this is the easy version. So if we're not already hovering over something, we're going to cache whatever interactable we're colliding with, and then we are going to call the on hover enter event. And then at the very end, if we're not actually, so this is if we are hitting something, and if the something we're hitting is different than the something we already know that we're hovering, we swap them. If the something we're hitting is new, then we'll just add that and cache it. But if we're not hitting anything, and we are hovering over something, or we have something cached, basically, if we were hovering over something last frame, but we're not actually looking at anything right now, then we need to uncache that as well. So we'll do hovered interactable on hover exit, invoke, and then set that hovered interactable equal to null, just uncache that. So if we are hitting something and the something is different, then we swap. If the something is new, then we add it. And if we're not hitting anything, but we were hitting something last frame, so if we looked at something and then we looked away, then we're going to exit and uncache. This is the raycast. So this is how we figure out if we're hovering over something or not. And we can actually test this out really quick. So if we jump back over into Unity, we can set up a really quick test. So underneath app menu icon, let's create an empty cube. We can delete the collider off of it because we are using the actual rigid body and sphere collider of the parent object. And then let's create a couple of materials inside of our project folder. So we'll create a materials folder. And we'll create one material called blue. And then in the albedo, let's just change it to some kind of blue color here. and drag and drop that onto our cube. And then we'll have another material. And this will be green. So you see the difference there, blue and green. And so we basically want to swap the materials whenever we hover over it. And that is actually really easy to accomplish. If we go over into our app menu icon with the Gaze Interactable script, all we have to do is add on hover enter. We'll drag and drop the cube into both of the game object slots. And then the function, we can just go down to mesh renderer and then select whatever material we want. So when we do hover over something, let's go to materials and drop the green in there. And then when we stop hovering, let's go back to blue. So super easy test just to make sure this works and to kind of show you how the functionality is going to happen. In the Gaze Interactor, our layer mask is set to nothing. We want it to be Gaze Interactable. Now if we go back, we should be able to play and that should work. There we go. So now when I'm looking at the cube, it turns green, and when I look away, it turns blue. Away. Beautiful. We're so close. So we have Gaze interacting working, we have Passthrough working. The only remaining aspect of this is how do we know if we're actually selecting the particular item that we're looking at? And also keep in mind that it's not the cube you're looking at, it's the actual sphere collider here. So make the sphere collider however big you want the looking at to end up being. So I like to actually make it a little bit bigger than whatever I'm needing to be looking at, just in case you're looking close to it, it'll still select it. So that's generally how that works. So let's add selection. First off, we need hands. We don't actually have any hands yet. So I am going to actually remove this capsule or just turn it off for now, just so it doesn't get in the way of our testing. And then inside of the player, let's go down to Oculus, VR, prefabs again. And then there is an OVR hand prefab. We want to drop that into our left hand anchor. And then the same thing, hand prefab into our right hand anchor. And then we need to go in and adjust the right hand types. There should be 3 places that you need to change it. There we go. And then we're just going to use the default material. You can feel free to mess around with that if you want. There's a few other different materials you can drop on there. We're just using this basic hand material. So now hands should be set up, so if you hit play, you should be able to see your hands in the world. That's a pretty easy setup. Let's jump back into our Gaze Interactor. Oh, and I just noticed that this hovered interactable is a serialized field. It doesn't actually need to be serialized, so I'm going to drop that off and not serialize the hovered interactable. I just saw that in the inspector as we were swapping over, and that's not what we need. While we're here though, we can create a private Gaze interactable selected interactable. And that's going to be the other one that we are going to cache. And then we're going to do something very similar as we did with the kind of caching in here, all the different settings, except it's going to be slightly easier for our actual attempt to select. So we're just going to create a method called try select in there. And then down here, let's create a private void try select method. There we go. So now every update we are performing a raycast, and that's going to cache a hovered interactable if there is one. And then we're going to try to select something if we have something hovered and we are pinching. Which brings us to, how do we know if we're actually pinching? And to do that, we need to have access to our hands. And so inside of our variable list here, I'm going to also create a private OVR hand. And this is going to be an array. So we're going to put square brackets and then we'll just call it hands. And then on start, we're just going to go through the whole scene and grab all of the hands that are currently in the scene. So this could be controllers, it could be hands, it could be whatever that has the OVR hand tag on it or script on it. So to do that, we'll just do hands is going to equal hands is going to be equal to find objects of type, objects plural of type, and then just OVR hands. And that's just going to go through the whole scene and grab all of the OVR hands. And then we can use that to see if any of them are pinching in this particular frame. And then it's not really something I want to write out over and over again. So we're just going to turn it into a method and call this private bool is pinching. And then we can just call this method whenever we want to check. So we're going to return the hands, and then we're going to do a system.link query. So this is going to add using system.link up at the very top of gaze interactor. And this is really just going to loop through all of the hands. And then it's going to do whatever we say in here. So we want the variable that we're going to call hand to do this. We want it to be a hand.get finger pinch strength. And then the particular finger we want is going to be the index finger. And if the index finger is pinching greater than, we'll call it a pinch strength, then we'll say that we are pinching. And then we'll add pinch strength up here at the top in the settings. That's going to be a serialized field, private float called pinch strength. And we'll set it to like something like 0.9. And we can actually add a range to this as well. So range between 0 and 1. Just so it doesn't get out of that range. There we go. And so now if any of the hands that have an index finger are having a value that is greater than 0.9, then we're going to consider them as pinching. And now we can use that method in our try select method. And to do that, we'll just do if we are pinching, then we're going to see if we don't have anything selected and we are hovering over something, then we want to actually select it. So say if selected interactable is null and the hovered interactable is not null, then we can actually select something. So we'll just turn the hovered interactable into the selected interactable. We'll just take whatever we had previously cached and cache it in selected interactable now. And then we'll call the selected interactable on select enter method. Invoke that. And then we can say if we were selecting something last frame and we're not pinching anymore, then we need to unselect it. So just kind of like we did with the raycast, if we were looking at something and we're not, same concept here. So if else and we are not select, if select, basically if we had something selected last frame. So if selected interactable is still cached and is not equal to null, then we want to call the select interactable on select exit. Invoke, call that event, and then we're going to uncache it. So we'll do selected interactable is equal to null. So now that's a lot. So let's kind of go through and step by step kind of walk out what we're doing. So inside, when we first start, we are grabbing all of the hands just so we have them. We're just going to cache all of those right on the start. And then every single frame, we are going to perform a raycast. This raycast is going to go through and check to see if we actually hit something of the layer mask. The particular layer mask we're using is the gaze interactable layer mask. And then we can confidently grab whatever component that we hit because we're using that layer mask to cache as the interactable. So this interactable variable is going to be whatever we actually looked at this particular frame. And then we are doing our first check, which is basically just saying if we aren't already hovering over something, and the something we're hovering over is different than what we looked at this frame, then we're basically going to swap them. So we are going to exit the one we're caching, and we're going to cache the new one, and then enter the new one. The next check is going to be, okay, we hit something, and we are not currently actually looking at something. So last frame we weren't looking at something, this frame we are, and then we are just going to cache it and then call the onHoverEnter. And then this last check is just if we didn't hit something, but we were hovering over something last frame, if we had something cached, then we're just going to exit that one as well. So that's how we're doing that. And then back in the update method, the next thing we do is we try to select something. So we are going to check to see if we're pinching by saying if any of our hands, any of them, if the index finger is greater than the pinch strength that we set up in our settings up at the top, then we'll consider is pinching to be true. And then if we are pinching something, and we don't already have something selected, but we are hovering over something, then we will cache that as selected and call onSelectEnter. And then if we are not pinching and we had something selected last frame, then we'll basically unpinch it and then uncache that. So that's the process for this whole system here. And then this is just, you know, whatever you want to happen after that goes into the Gaze interactable script. So now to demonstrate that, we can go into project and create a new material. We'll just go create material, and this can be red. And then on our app menu icon in the hover-enter, we'll add, we will change the cube's mesh renderer to red. And then same thing for onSelectExit. We'll just change it back to green. We'll assume we're already looking at it. Oh, whoops. We want the cube's mesh renderer to be green. There we go. We'll save that, and then we shouldn't have to do anything else. Everything else is set up correctly. This is our pinch strength. You can adjust if you want. I'm going to hit play, back into play mode, and then we've got our hand tracking. Our hands show up. And then I'm looking at the cube, and then when I press either of my hands, we are pinching. And then when I look away, look at it, pinch, look away, try to pinch, nothing happens if I'm looking away. If I look at it, pinch, it is selected. So there we go. So at this point, you have all of the functionality of the Gaze interaction, and you have all of the pieces that you need in order to do really whatever you want with it. So I've actually gone through and created a fun little demo where I added in all the icons that I got from the internet. You'll be able to download this project here. So this one, when you look at a particular icon, it will actually expand a little bit, and I tried to mirror this as close to the Vision Pro demo videos that they have shown us. So it's whenever you look at an icon, it'll expand a little bit, get a little bigger. And then for the TV icon in particular, you can actually select, and then it'll bring up a new kind of simulated UI as well. And then there is a, if we look at TV again, and then there's a little button right there. I don't know if it's lined up correctly. So if you look at that and select, it'll actually go back to the menu. So let me real quick walk you through how these icons are set up. So in the photos icon here, all the icons are just free icons that I downloaded from the internet, and they are set up very similar to how we set up everything over in the other project. So we have a Gaze interactable, we have sphere collider, a rigid body, and then when you hover over it, we're just calling this a resize script that basically just increases the scale by 0.1, and then the duration is 0.1. So it just increases it a little bit and sizes it up. So on hover enter, we are increasing the size. On hover exit, we're decreasing the size. And then on the TV app, you'll see we're actually doing something a little different. So TV menu icon, we are resizing it the same, but on select enter, whenever we click on it, we are fading out all of the apps here using my fade out method. And then we are fading in this other canvas here. This one gets faded in using this canvas group here. And then On the canvas group, I've just set up a another little button over here that can toggle on. And so this is just a little button icon that I have a pretty large sphere to, because it was kind of hard to target that small of a spot with it being that far away. So I increased the size of this look at sphere. But when you look at that and click, it'll just basically undo what we just did. So this is my hack and slash version of it. Feel free to download it, play around with it, download the APK or the Unity project, whatever you want to get your hands on. So there we go. That's how we actually do the gaze interaction with the Quest Pro. This should also work on the Quest 2 and then the Quest 3 when that eventually comes out, and y'all can actually get a feel for how it works. It's actually super nice. Like Thrill said in his video, I'll reference that again. It feels like mind control when you just look at something and you can click with your little pinch action. It's so nice. You just look and click and it's so fast, as opposed to the Raycast where you're like trying to line it up with buttons and you click it on. You just look at where you want, and it really is like mind control. I definitely encourage you to try it out. It's so fun. And then the rest of the series is going to be pretty cool. We're just going to keep cranking on. We're going to work on doing keyboards, fading in and out the pass-through. We're going to work on actually moving around the apps in the world. There's a lot of fun stuff we're going to do in the series, so definitely subscribe if you're interested in that kind of thing. And if you want to learn more about VR in a lot deeper sense, I have an entire course with over 130 videos now of how to actually build out VR games. We end up going through and making a whole county fair app with a bunch of little mini games. It's pretty fun. A lot of my students have actually gotten jobs off of learning from the course, so highly encourage you. Look in that. There's a link in the description. You can go through and see all the modules. If you've seen Valem around on YouTube or VR with Andrew, they are collaborating with me as well. So Valem does a whole multiplayer section. Andrew does a whole optimization section. It's a pretty awesome course. So highly encourage you to check that out. And I'll see you in the next one.